Of course, can't skip that. Watch that for 5 minutes. It needs to blow up.
Excellent.
Perfect.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. My name is Kathy Rogers. I'm here with Eileen Kent, who's going to be leading you through the math portions of the PSAT from October. She's going to start with a select group of questions that she kind of picked out. But if you want her to go over something specific, just place it in the chat and I can jump back in and let her know, or she'll check the chat as well if she has time. Please note that your test may be a little bit different than her test. I guess the test this year, everybody had the same questions. They just might be in a different order. So if she says number 3, might not actually correlate to your number 3, but you should have the question in your test. So with that said, I'm going to let Eileen take it away, and we go.
Oh, thank you, Kathy. All right, so I'm just going to work out the questions here on my .cam. And like Kathy said, it might be in a different order than what you have. I am going to try and make it through the questions from the no calculator section. If you are interested in having someone go through this with you one-on-one, every single question, or you have some more specific questions that I do not get a chance to get to, I do want to make you aware we have virtual SAT crams and ACT crams coming up. We have winter ones. We have a special running actually December 21st and 22nd from 9 to 1 for the SAT cram. And we have another one on December 28th and 29th from 9 to 1 that will cover the ACT. These are $395. We also offer group and one-on-one tutoring that can go for 8 weeks in tutoring. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so on your PSAT, when you got to the math section, you saw this lovely sheet, and you knew it was the math section here, and it's no calculator. This is our section 3. Make sure when you're going over your test, you do not work ahead or go back to any other question. You don't want to invalidate your test in any way. Now, normally you are given 25 minutes to answer 17 questions. It will probably take me a little longer than 25 minutes to go through these 17 questions because I'm going to explain each step. However, if you are practicing and become more and more familiar with this test, you should be able to pace yourself down. I do want to make you aware that the last few questions are gridding questions. They are not multiple choice questions. And sometimes it's a good idea to start with those if your pacing isn't perfect, so that if you do run out of time and you want to guess, you can guess on those multiple choice. Now, when your proctor during your test gives you the go-ahead to start, it is usually a good idea on this page, particularly where all your other formulas are down here at the bottom. I'll move the .cam a little, to add a couple more formulas. Now, these formulas here are pretty helpful and handy, but I do want to mention there are a couple other formulas you'll want to quickly jot down immediately when this section starts. Those are the midpoint, distance, slope, and quadratic. Now, of course, the more formulas that you know, the better off you will be on this test, but these are some must-know formulas for this test. Now, these others you do not necessarily need to memorize, but of course, it will save you time flipping back and forth in your test book. I do also want to point out linear functions can be written in 3 separate ways: standard form, point slope form, and slope intercept form. And being able to switch between those is also pretty helpful for this test. So typically I will start my test this way. I write these all down, write out the formulas, and then I will go ahead to my questions and get started. Now for me, this is my number 1, and I'm just gonna zoom in a little bit for you. And go ahead and start solving some of these questions. Now, this may not have been your number 1, but everybody did see this question. And it did ask you, the function f is defined by f of x here. What is the value of f of 2? Now, I like to circle what is actually being asked of me. Now, this one isn't a very long question, but sometimes you will get word problems. So just being in the habit of circling and underlining will help you out throughout your test. So in this case, my question is asking me what is the value of the function with 2 plugged in. So I'm just going to plug in my 2 here where I see all of my x's. So I rewrite this now. If you notice, there's plenty of space to write on my sheet. Make sure you're writing neatly so that you are able to understand your work. So you just plug in your 2 here. And then you're going to want to follow order of operations. PEMDAS is usually the acronym we are pretty familiar with. So in this case, that would look like this and something like this, where I end up with 29. So the correct answer would have been D, 29. They just needed you to plug in and follow your order of operations. All right, moving on to number 2. Now, number 2 gives you this box up here with some data in it, and it says the table gives some values of x and their corresponding values of g of x. Which of the following could be the graph in the xy plane? In the xy plane just means the coordinate plane that most of you guys are familiar with. And I see some of you guys are asking about a PDF of the test. Unfortunately, because of copyright, we can't share that, so I can't put it up on my screen. But I don't have an actual PDF copy I can share with you. So follow along with me, and then if you do end up doing the tutoring, we're able to give you copies then. Okay. So the way I did this one, looking at this graph, I plotted my points. So what you needed to know here was this is actually standing for my y point. So I could rewrite these as ordered pairs as -3, 2. Now on the test, I wouldn't rewrite each one of these as an ordered pair. That would take up some of my time. I would just need to remember that these stand for ordered pairs, x coordinate and y coordinate. Now looking at my graph, I can see here that -3, 2 is not even an option for graph A. Can't be the correct answer. It is an option on graph B. However, the last point here, 3, 1, is not on my graph. So in order to solve this one, I would just continue this process where I plot each one of my points, and I notice this second point here, not on my graph. That only leaves me one option. 3, 1 is on there, 0, -1 is on there, and +3, 1 is. So this would have been my correct answer. Now you are most likely going to see these types of graphs. Do not be scared by the weird shapes that they could possibly give you or make you do. All you have to do is plot some points and move on. All right, moving on to my question number 3. My question number 3 was this equation here, and it asks me what value of P would satisfy the given equation. There's not a Zoom link for this review. We're going to record this and post this again later, or you can set up private tutoring with this too to go over all of the questions. And next Tuesday, Sheila will be going over the verbal section. So for number 3, which p-value satisfies the given equation? So for this one, we have a few options. But the easiest, quickest way to do this is to just solve for p. If you're not sure how to solve for p, of course, you could plug the numbers in and kind of work your way backwards. But in this case, I could solve this equation algebraically, like so, and I will find that p is 6. Okay. For number 4, now you see some of the questions get a little longer No worries. We know some of our strategies. We're going to underline the important information and definitely underline our stems so we know what we're being asked. The total cost to rent an inflatable slide for a birthday party is $23 per hour with an initial $15 setup fee. Those are the only numbers given to me in this part of the question, so I'm going to underline them. Which of the following equations represents the relationship between the total cost in dollars and the number of hours to rent the inflatable slide? So what I'm going to be looking for is an equation to represent this. So it tells me here C is my cost. So C is my cost. So that's going to equal my total number of hours and my rental fees. So it was, remember up here, $23 per hour. So I multiply that times the hours. And then I add the initial fee of $15. So they were looking for answer choice D. For number 5, this asks which expression is equivalent to. So equivalent here, our math term, equal to, you can write that above it. So which expression is the same as this? To solve this one, you would use what is called the FOIL method. So you're going to first multiply your first set, which would be y times y, which gives you y squared. Then your outer, so y times 5, so plus 5y. Your inner, so negative 4y. And then your last, negative 4 times 5 gives you a negative 20. Do not forget this part in here are like terms. They can be combined. So we would get y squared plus y minus 20, which is here. Make sure you read each answer choice carefully. Look how similar A and B look. Do not go so quickly that you make a simple error after you did all the steps for the math correctly. That would be no good. Okay. Number 6. So number 6 says, if xy is a solution to the system of equations, what is the value of x times y? That's actually what they're asking me. And it's important to underline this because you want to make sure you don't actually solve a system of equations because that's not what they're asking you to do, even though you have 2 equations. What they're asking you to do is to find the value of x times y. So it's a little tricky here. So what I did first is I started with this equation because it had an exponent. I rewrote it and took the square root of both sides to kind of get rid of that exponent. That leaves me with 5x plus y equals 8. I subtracted 5x from both sides. Now, the reason I did this was because I wanted this to be in the same format as this equation here, which was in the form y equals. So now I have 2 equations that both say y equals. I can now set these 2 equations equal to each other to figure out what exactly x is, what y is, and then multiply them. So when I set these 2 equal to each other, I get negative 3x equals negative 5x plus 8. I will add my 5x to both sides. That leaves me with 2x equals 8. So x is 4. Now the next step, I took this 4 and I plugged it in right here to this equation. It doesn't matter which one you plug it into. I just prefer to do the easier way without the exponent because of course this test is timed and I want to do this the quickest way possible. So negative 3 times 4 will give me my y, which is negative 12. Do not stop here. Remember, we have to multiply. We have to multiply 4 times negative 12 to get our answer, negative 48. So this one did require a little bit more work, which would be expected. We're up to number 6 now. This section only has 17 questions. And the last couple will be those grid-ins. So at this point, it might, turn up a little bit. Not too hard. All right, number 7. In the XY plane, the line L contains the points 1, 3, and has a slope of 2. Which of the following could be the equation of line L? That's what they're actually asking us, is to take this point and this slope and put it into an equation. Now, for this one, because I have a point and I have a slope, I'm going to use point slope form. If you remember at the beginning of our webinar, I mentioned there are a couple different ways we can write linear functions. So this is one of the ways. And I'll just write this. This is our point slope form. So I'm going to plug into my formula now. So my y point goes here, my x here, and my slope, of course, is my m. So I'm going to rewrite this as y minus 3 equals 2, x minus 1. And then I'm going to solve this algebraically by distributing my 2 here and adding my 3 to this side. So y equals 2x plus 1. The correct answer is C. Oh, you're welcome, Leslie. Thanks for joining. All right, so on to number 8. Hope this is clear on your screen. There we go. How many different values of x satisfy this equation above? So how many x's are there that could fit into this equation? So the best way to do this, for me at least, was to just solve it. So we started by distributing my 3 right here. And I had 10 minus 3x minus 6 equals 3x plus 4. Then I combined my like terms. I have a 10 minus 6 over here. So I ended up with a negative 3x plus 4 equals 3x plus 4. Now, this might throw some students off. They look very similar. However, one of them is a negative, one of them is not. So they technically are not the same. So from here, I'm going to try and just solve for my x. So I'm going to subtract 3x from both sides to cancel it out over here. I will have a negative 6x plus 4 equals 4. Now I'm going to move my 4 over. And negative 6x ends up equaling 0. It doesn't matter what I divide that by, x is going to always be 0. There's only one answer to that equation. It happens to be 0. Sometimes I think they throw this on there on purpose to try and confuse students because the equations look really similar. But go ahead and finish your steps and you'll see that x is just going to equal 0. One answer. Okay. Now we're moving on to number 9. Hopefully when you are taking this test or when you were taking this test, your timing and your pacing was pretty good and you didn't feel too rushed and you were able to get this far with confidence. So for number 9, this one is asking us, in the XY plane, the graph of a linear inequality includes the points 0, 2, 1, 1, and 4, 0. So these are my points. And which of the following could be the inequality? So the first thing I want to point out is look at the points. Look at the points they give you. One of those points, this one in particular, is a dead giveaway. It's 0, 2. That means it's definitely going to be our intercept, our y-intercept. You remember in slope-intercept form, which looks like y equals mx plus b, b is our intercept, that's when x equals 0. They gave us that, which means our intercept has to be 2. I can immediately get rid of 2 answer choices, even if I know nothing about this problem, but I do know what intercept means, and I know my slope-intercept form, I've already narrowed it down. Now, my next step would be to look at the slope. They're identical here. They're both -1/2. So now the next difference I notice is in my inequality. So how do I decide between y being less than or equal to or y being greater than or equal to? Well, I plugged in a point for x and solved for y to see which way my inequality sign needs to go. I used 4, 0 just because I knew that the 0 would be an easy point. So 0 would be my y. I know my slope is going to be -1/2. I'm going to plug in 4 for my x plus 2. I just plugged into this equation here, and I'm going to leave this as an equal sign until I decide which way it needs to go. So -1/2 times 4. And remember, we don't have a calculator, but if we remember multiplying with fractions, we could always put a whole number on top of a 1. You can even reduce your fractions like this to make your life even easier and say -1 times 2 is going to be -2. 1 times 1 is 1. -2/1 is the same as just -2. When I add my other 2 to it, I end up with a 0. Well, that doesn't help me because it's still equal. So I have to plug in one more point, which would be my 1. I can 1, 1. I can plug that in here and say, well, -1/2 times 1 is -1/2. -1/2 plus 2 is just a half, which is definitely not bigger. So my answer choice here has to be A. Okay. Moving on to number 10. I have more graphs. Graphs will show up on this PSAT and the SAT a couple of times, nothing to be afraid of. The function f is defined by f of x equals 3x plus 2. Which of the following is the graph of y equals f of x in this plane? So basically, they're asking me to plot this equation. So again, that's going to be my intercept. And this little guy here is going to be my slope. So first thing I notice, my slope is a positive. Well, these 2 lines down here are going down. Definitely not going to be them. I like to try and eliminate any answer choices I know right off the bat can't be the answer, especially if I am ending up in a time crunch. At least I gave myself a 50-50 shot now because I know it's not going to be one of these. Now, the other thing I noticed, my intercept is 2. This line does not touch the 2 at the y-axis. This cannot be my graph. That means answer choice B is my option. Number 11, 12, and 13 are a little bit longer. And again, that's why I suggest sometimes it might be best if we do the grid-ins first and then come back to these, because if you did have to guess, at least you have a 25% chance of getting it right. If you're stuck with the grid-ins, there's not much you can guess on. So definitely going a different way might help. For this one, number 11, a scholarship program increases the total value of scholarships awarded each year by 7% of the total value awarded the previous year. For the 3rd year of the program, the total value of scholarships awarded was $750,000. Which of the following equations best models the total value in dollars of the nth year? So for this one, we're actually going to be using our interest formula. So if we remember our interest formula, simple interest, where we could have an initial amount like 750,000 times our rate to the power of our time. Now, looking at A, that wouldn't make sense because we know that we are talking about the third year. So I'm going to eliminate A and B as possible answer choices because these don't include my third year when I'm talking about the time in relation to the time. Because remember, the 750,000 is in relation to the third year, not the initial year. The other thing I noticed looking at my rate, I know it says 7%, and we know 7% as a decimal is 0.07, but it's of the total value awarded from the previous year. So it's actually the whole value plus an additional 7%. So this would be our correct answer. For number 12, we have another small word problem. This one here, it says for the given function g, which of the following equivalent forms, so again, there's that math term equivalent, just meaning equal. So which one of these is equal to this? For the y-coordinate of the y-intercept, and again, y-intercept means x is 0, of the graph y equals g of x in the xy plane as a constant or coefficient. Now again, if we know that the y-intercept is x equals 0, then we're just going to plug in 0 for the x and simplify this. Well, that makes my life pretty easy because 0 plus 4 is just going to be 4 again. So I can keep this 1/5 to the 5th to the 4th. It's pretty easy. So I can just choose answer choice A. I can also multiply this to the 4th and then divide it by 5 if that would make you happier. But just plugging in 0 is much easier on these. Number 13 is our last multiple choice question for the non-calculator section. It says, springs are made from different numbers of coils. Each spring is hung vertically with one end attached to a rod, and each spring stretches from its own weight. The total length in centimeters of each hanging string is recorded as shown in the graph. So a parabola that models the data is also shown. Here's our question. Finally, which of the following functions best models the recorded length where n is less than or equal to, or 5 is less than or equal to n, which is also less than or equal to 75. So for this one, there's quite a few equations. And again, I don't have a calculator on this section. So my best bet is to pick an easy number from my graph and plug it in. A nice number. Looking at my graph, I think 10 is a pretty easy number to deal with. 10 squared is 100. 100 plus 4.3, well, that would leave me with 104.3, which is clearly nowhere near where I need to be on my y-axis. I'm not even to 10. These are going up by 20s. Halfway would be 10. I've got to be under 10. So that wouldn't make sense. Same thing here. 10 squared gives me 100. 100 minus 30, 74. That's still about 74, so that's way too high. I need a really tiny number. So these decimals are starting to look a lot better. Again, 100 times 0.24, still going to have 24 when I'm done with this. That's, again, way too high. This would be the only thing that would make sense because this would leave me, after multiplying it by 100, 2.4 minus 3 plus 4.3, that would probably leave me under the 20. So that would be my best bet for this multiple choice. And again, using nice numbers like 10 would be your best way to go on this one. You could have plugged in any one of the numbers. I just choose to pick 10 because it's the easiest to multiply. That ends the multiple choice section of the PSAT. There are grid-ins on the next section, and just a quick review, for the grid-ins, you'll get grids that look like this. They all have 4 spots. If your answer does not fit in the 4 spots, then you need to redo the question, because all answers, even including the fraction bar or the decimal point, will fit into the grid-in. If you have something like a mixed number, something like maybe 3.5, do not put it in as this 31/2, because then that's how it's going to be read, not 3n1/2 like this. We don't want to do that. These directions are also included in your PSAT in case you forget. But just as a quick overview, you do need to plot in both the lines up here and in the bubbles down here for it to count. And you do need to include decimals and fractions if they are in your answer. Typically, they do not have dollar signs or degree symbols, but if your question asks for it, do not grid that, because that is not going to be part of your answer. It doesn't necessarily matter whether you start on the left or the right. Just be consistent with it and don't leave a middle open. And then, of course, always bubble. Okay. Now, once you get to these grid-ins, if you didn't start with them, at least you're almost done. But for the first one, it asks you, what is one possible value of x that satisfies the given equation? Now, there are going to be 3 options that could give me an x. But if you read carefully, it says positive value. So maybe not all 3 would be the correct answer. So using the zero product property, I'm going to set all of my zeros or solutions equal the SAT will take either one. The only thing you cannot use is this guy because he's not positive. He's a -3. So make sure you read these very carefully. You could have stopped after 1 because it was positive if you are in a time crunch. But for the purpose of our webinar, I'll do all 3. For number 15, this says, in 1947, milk cost 75 cents a gallon. Oh man, it's a lot more now. Bananas cost 15 cents per pound. That's still pretty close. Donna bought 2 gallons of milk, some bananas, and spent a total of $2.25 in 1947. How many pounds of bananas did she buy? Well, this 1947 thing is completely irrelevant. It's just extra information to make your word problem longer and add more numbers and confuse you. Thank you, PSAT. You don't need that information. What you did need, however, was the gallons of milk were 75 cents, and the bananas are 15 cents to get your total cost. Now, they did tell me that I have 2 gallons of milk, so I'm going to plug a 2 in for my milk, and they did tell me that my total was $2.25. What they didn't tell me was my bananas. So I got to figure out what B is. How many pounds of bananas did I buy? Well, 75 cents times 2 gives me $1.50. And I just write each step for you guys. Once I have that, I can subtract that from both sides. And I'm left with 75 cents. And I can divide that by my 15 cents per pound of banana, because I spent 75 cents on them. So that gives me a total of 5 pounds. That's a lot of pounds of bananas. So on my grid in, I would just put in a 5 in my little box and bubble wherever my 5 was. Same thing up here. I could have bubbled a 4 or a 5. As long as I wrote it in my box all the way to the left or all the way to the right, and I bubbled the correct number underneath, then I was good to go. For number 16, a triangle RST is congruent to triangle XYZ. So this is something we go over in geometry. Congruent meaning they are the same size, same shape. So R is going to correspond with X. Well, that's nice. We can draw R, S, T the same way we draw X, Y, and Z because R corresponds to X, S corresponds to Y. So that must mean that T is congruent to Z. That would be the only angle left. What they also tell me is R is 28 and S is 54. So I have R, I have S. What is Z? Well, Z is also T because they are congruent. So I can add 28 and 54 together, which would give me 82. I do have to remember from geometry that all triangles add up to 180 degrees, and 2 of those angles are 82, which leaves me needing 98 more degrees. And again, on your grid, you only need the 9 and the 8 all the way to the left or all the way to the right, bubbled in. That way, you get credit. Last question on the no calculator section is a system of equations. That was nice of them to leave this for the end. Typically, these have a couple more steps than other types of problems. But for this one, we can substitute, we can eliminate. Technically, you could graph for systems of equations, but I don't have graph paper and I want this to be exact, so I'm not going to use that option. So let's start by substituting. So I'm going to take my equation here and substitute what x is. So I'm going to add 2y. So x is going to be 2y plus 3, and I'll go ahead and plug that in up top. So to this equation, 2y plus 3 equals 24. Distribute my 4. So 8y plus 12. Oh, I think I forgot to write. Oh, I did. My minus 5y equals 24 minus 5y equals 24. Combine my like terms. So 3y plus 12 equals 24. Subtract 12. So 3y equals 12. So that means y equals 4. When I plug that back in, then I know that x is going to be 11. So my answer is 11. Again, I'm only going to have to plug in the 11 all the way to the left or all the way to the right to solve this. Now, once I have finished this question, I've finished bubbling. Hopefully you have paced yourself well enough. You can go back over the answers to all of the questions. I don't recommend changing any of your answers, but if there was one you potentially skipped in that 2-pass rule that you learned, then now would be a good time to go back over it. And if not, if in your second pass you are unable to still answer it, make an educated guess and move on. And then make sure your bubble sheet is completely darkened and filled in correctly. And then sit tight for time to be called. And of course, all this information, they write it again for you at the bottom, and there's a stop sign. Don't go ahead. Even if you have more time in this section, you have to stop. You can put your pencil down, take a deep breath and relax. because the next section is also going to be math. It always goes in the same order. PSAT and SAT do this, where you will have another math section. It's a little bit longer, but you do get a calculator. Now, we have a little bit more time, so I do want to show you guys from the calculator section the grid-in ones. I assume with the multiple choice ones, most students are able to figure those ones out, and I know that they give you the answer, and usually the questions I get in tutoring are on the grid-in ones because there isn't that option of working backwards and plugging in. So these typically are a little bit harder for some students. So skipping over to section 4, where we have the grid-in section. Now, again, these might have been in a different order for you, but typically on the SAT, the first question, just like on the multiple choice, is the easiest, and then it will go to the hardest question. So starting at the first grid-in. So like I said, I would recommend when the time starts for section 4, again, rewriting your formulas like we did at the beginning of the non-calculator section, and then moving straight to the grid-ins and then going back to multiple choice. The first grid-in will be your easiest grid-in. And this one says if 125% of X is 225, what's the value of X? So you can use a couple of different ways to solve this. I typically use the is over of percent over 100 method and use cross products to solve. So let me go ahead and plug in what they give me. They give me my percent and they give me my is. They do not give me my of. So that means 225 is 125% of some number. So cross products or cross multiply. Again, this is our wonderful calculator section. You can use any scientific calculator for a function calculator. I have a TI-83 here for this. It's not necessary, and if you're not familiar with these graphing calculators, I don't recommend using them because there's quite a few buttons and you can kind of mess yourself up. But you can just multiply 225 times 100 and divide that by 125. So X is 180. Some of the problems in the calculator section you can do without a calculator. This one, you may want to punch it twice just to be sure, but 180 would sound reasonable because we're over 100%. So this number would be over this one or greater than this one. So this makes sense. And then I would just grid in 180 and make sure I bubble it in correctly. Moving on to number 29. Number 29 has the top 12 films in the box office revenue from the United Kingdom from 1989 to 2015. Notice most of them are Harry Potter. Yay! We like Harry Potter. The bar graph shows the UK box office revenue for the top 12 films in the UK from 1989 to 2015. How many of the films had the UK box office revenue between 60 and 100 million pounds? So looking at my graph, here's my revenue, millions of pounds. Always check that. Sometimes these don't match up and you have to do multiplication or some sort of conversion. In this case, they were nice enough to leave it with millions to millions. So here's all of our movies. So we're going to be looking for from 60 to 100. So our graph, kind of draw it all the way up to make it a little bit obvious. Looks like there's 1, there's 2, there's 3, there's 4. This little guy looks like it, but he pokes just past it. So unfortunately, Skyfall does not count in our group. Only these 4 will be the films that fall between 60 and 100. So my answer is 4. And I will grid in 4 all the way to the left or all the way to the right and bubble the corresponding bubble for this question. For my next one, number 30, sorry, I have a lot of peepers. For number 30, you are given again a system of equations. If you are not familiar with system of equations or not confident with them, definitely practice them. They will show up. Clearly, they showed up quite a few times on our PSAT this time. Expect them on the SAT. But this one says, in the system of equations above, A is a positive constant. If the graphs of the equations are perpendicular lines in the XY plane, what's the value of A? So I'm solving for this guy here, and I know that they're perpendicular lines. Well, the one thing I know about perpendicular lines is that they always have opposite reciprocals. I don't think I spelled that right. That's okay. That's why I do math, not verbal. For this one, I'm going to put both of these equations into slope-intercept form so that I can see what their slopes are. So starting with the first equation, I'm going to subtract my 5x so that y equals negative 5x plus 13. Well, opposite reciprocal would be a positive 1/5. So this equation here has to have a positive 1/5 slope. So taking that equation and converting it into slope-intercept form, I'm going to subtract my ax from both sides, divide by -1. I have y is ax plus 7, where it's going to be 1/5. Now I could have stopped right here, but I always like to, if I have the time, finish it and plug it in just to check my work. Now, typically what I tell my students is go to this point and stop, go to the next question and finish your test, then come back. But because we're on that one, I like to do the whole thing. This is what I would have done as kind of my check to make sure that it would have worked. Now, my last question from the calculator section, if you notice, I actually didn't need my calculator for 29 or 30. I actually don't need it for 31 either. So again, when you're on the calculator section, use it sparingly. Use it when you must use it. Not all questions will call for it. So save yourself the time and potential punching in errors that could occur. So for our last question, number 31, the table above shows the frequencies for the 9 different values that occur in a 31-item data set. What is the median value of the data set? So what I needed to know here is what median value means, which is middle. So what is the middle of a 31-item set? Well, the middle of 31 is 15.5. So I have to figure out here where 15.5 falls. So this is a table up here that tells me the frequency. So I would expect 4 33s, 7 34s, 6 35s is how I would read this. So the best way for me to do this is to start here and add them together until I find out where 15th or 16th data falls so that I know where my middle is for this set. So in this case, 4 plus 7 is 11. I'm not quite there, but 11 plus 6, well, that puts me all the way to 17. So that means this middle point falls in here. So that value was 35. So the correct answer to this one would have been 35, because my middle or median value is 35 for this set. You could have started from the bottom up or the top down, but I went for the bigger numbers because I knew I had to get all the way to 15. Okay. All right, so that concludes the questions that I had planned on covering. I'll just leave this here for you guys. If anyone puts in the chat maybe a specific multiple choice question from section 4, I can try and go over that one. Again, I want to point out that we do have a virtual SAT cram during winter break on December 21st and 22nd from 9 to 1 each day. If you're more of an ACT kind of kid, we have that cram December 28th and 29th from 9 to 1, and the cost for that is $395. If you are going away for winter break or crayons are not your thing, we do have group sessions, or we have one-on-one private sessions. The group sessions will last for 8 weeks leading up to an official test date that you can do. We have in-person, we have virtual, and we also have 5 physical locations that you can call to get more information. We are on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and YouTube as well if you need information to reach out to the nearest director for information on studying for your SAT or ACT. All right, let me give it a few minutes in the chat. If nobody has specific questions, and I think we are all set. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening to me go over all of these questions. This is recorded. It will be posted in case you missed any of it or you want to go over it again later on. I'll come back on camera for you guys. Oh, you're welcome, Leslie. Thanks for tuning in. All right, guys. No questions are coming in, so have a great night. Thank you so much. And I look forward to hearing from you guys. Bye.